Good morning. Yeah. No. I gotta get it out. Does that mean he's going to get out? If I go to sleep? Just wondered. Oh, I bet you would. I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, for last night, for the grade formal percent, Gary had put together from photos that Lois Wood took all of the campus, spring, summer, fall, with Camp Pocamoka in the background and by the acapella choir. It was really nice. Gary just was the kind of thing Gary can do. It's amazing.
Good afternoon, friends. It's wonderful to be here talking with you this afternoon. I'm Eileen Flory. I live around the corner in J Wing. So my talk today is called The Sorcerer's Apprentice, a healing ceremony among the indigenous Otomi of Mexico. I'll tell you in just a little bit why I thought of myself as a sorcerer's apprentice, but first some background. Getting a little more background than you thought you'd get, I guess. I wonder what's wrong, Gary. It won't even go back to its.
It won't advance.
Well, that's the key here, right? Yeah. Good. Okay.
Back to the beginning.
No, this is fine. Thank you. Sorry about that. It was working just a minute ago. So I've always been interested in Mexico, and it's all my father's fault, I think. He was a botanist, and he took his family with him when he was studying plant migrations up and down Western North America, down into Mexico in the mountain ranges there. So with my family, I took 4 trips to Mexico, once in the first grade for a spring quarter. They'd just pull us out of school and everything was good. Then once again in the 6th grade for spring quarter. Then when I was in the 9th grade for a year and a quarter. And then when I was just starting college for fall quarter. I've been to Mexico many other times for other purposes, but right now, this is one trip, one summer in an Otomi village off the beaten track of Mexico. So this is proof. That's me on the horse as I think, I don't know, does that look like a sixth grader? My little brother and my parents. We were a family of 4. And on the trip when I was in the 6th grade, we were walking through a market in a town, and across the marketplace, I saw some ladies that were dressed differently from most of the people you see in this picture here. And they were speaking a language that even at that time I knew was not Spanish. I asked my parents to explain. I said, what is this anyway? And they said, those are people who don't live in town here probably. They live in their own village away from town. They speak their own language. They have their own way of life. Sometimes they might not even think of themselves as belonging to the nation of Mexico. And at that time, I was hooked. So a couple summers, I had the opportunity when I was a graduate student in ethnomusicology, which is the anthropology of music, to spend a summer with the Otomi people. The gray means nothing. This is a map, a little map that I crudely superimposed on a bigger map of Mexico. But the red and yellow are places where the Otomi people live, contemporary Otomi people. And the first summer I was doing anthropology work, I was right in that big blotch in the middle there, in a high, dry valley in central Mexico. The second time, which is what I'm going to show you today, I was in more of the easternmost range of the Otomi people. It was a field school. That means that our professor from Indiana University took 4 of us students. He had done work in that area before as an anthropologist. I was behind the camera, and to the left are my 3 fellow students, another woman and 2 men. And to get to where we were going to study, we took the bus to that river, got off the bus, waited for the canoe with an outboard motor on it to come and take us across the river. And then we got on another bus, which was much more rickety, rode for a little while to the end of the road to a town called Ixhuatlan. And in Ixhuatlan, which is the seat of the municipality, or we might call it a county, our professor introduced us to the head guy there and talked a little bit about what we wanted to do, what each of us was interested in. And that man in Ixhuatlan thought, I think you would be good in this village, you would be good in this village, and so on, and wrote us each a letter of recommendation to the head person in each of those villages. So we had an in, which is what you always need when you're going to do this kind of studying. So the 4 of us walked a big circle and dropped each of us off in our own place. So we walked up Rocky Trail, we walked down muddy slopes. This was by the way, my trip to market every week in Ixhuatlan. And I like to say that it took me 3 hours walking one way, or 4, depending on conditions underfoot. And you see that sometimes, for instance, the pigs improve on the trail, and something else might have happened along the way. So 3 or 4 hours. But look at that, isn't that something? And finally, we come to Piedra Grande, which means large rock. That's the name of the village. This is a central square in Piedra Grande, used by people, by livestock, and you can see the kind of houses that are there. It's a very small village. Everybody is an indigenous Otomi person except the school teacher, who was just leaving as I arrived it was the end of his school year. He told me, I can't wait to get out of here. I hate it here. The people aren't interested in education. It's just primitive living. But in Mexico, it's required that new teachers, like doctors also, teach in rural areas. And the houses, I'm just giving you a background. We'll get to the Sorcerer's Apprentice in a minute, okay? Made of saplings or bamboo with a thatched roof. You sleep maybe on a cot if you're lucky, or otherwise on the packed earth floor. And Piedra Grande has running water in the form of a stream, a creek. They called it a river. I think that was a little grandiose, actually. I lived with a family. Here's Julia in the pink, and 3 of her 4 girls and their dog Chocolate, which is chocolate. There's Julia's husband, Pedro. He is a farmer. He's sharpening his hoe there. I often woke in the morning to the sound of him sharpening his hoe. Subsistent agriculture, they grow what they eat and they eat what they grow. Also a little bit of gathering of fruit in the woods, a small bit of hunting if you're lucky. A few people have maybe a few coffee trees for a cash crop, but it's definitely not a cash economy, not much money. Lots of corn, beans, and squash, which is the main things that they grow. Corn is king in this area. You soak the dry corn, simmer it for hours and hours. It's a little more complicated than that. These people's ancestors knew the chemistry of it. They've had it figured all out, how to make a tortilla. But this is the birth of a tortilla. You wash your corn in the running water, and then you grind it. And that's Julia and her 4 girls. The oldest is 10, and the youngest is going on 2. The 10-year-old could do everything knew how to do everything that her mother could do at that point. Then you pat out your tortillas and cook them over the fire. And then one day, a little girl, in fact, it's that little girl in pink there, Juanito's daughter, came running to me and said, "Come on, Juanito is cutting paper." So that's what he's doing here. And I called myself the Sorcerer's Apprentice because in Piedra Grande, with the life that they lived, which was very different from mine, I arrived, said hello, started asking a whole bunch of questions, taking a lot of pictures, and they really didn't have a basic understanding of why I was there or what I was doing. So Juanito and his elderly assistant named Marcelino thought that I was there to learn how to do the rituals that Juanito did, the healing ceremonies. And in a way, they were right. I was there to learn all about how they did it, not to perform them myself, but to think about them and add the information to the anthropological knowledge. So that's why I'm the Sorcerer's Apprentice. That, yes, he's cutting. They look like paper dolls, don't they? Only really kind of fancy and strange. He cut stacks and stacks of each paper doll, which represented a spirit. And the ceremonies, healing ceremonies that he performed were to make spirits happy. And there were spirits, that's that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll show you in a minute, well, how many spirits he actually cut. These ceremonies, in Spanish, the word is costumbre. It's a ceremony to maintain or reestablish balance among the spirits and humans, because that's what makes us healthy, is that kind of balance. keeps the spirits satisfied and living where they belong, which for most of them is not in town, it's out in the woods. And this costumbre was requested by Vicente's extended family. They had been having regular costumbres or healing ceremonies, even when things weren't going wrong. They just kept having them, sort of preventive medicine, you might say. But they had been slacking off lately, and things had started to go wrong for them. So this was the first of these resumed healing ceremonies for them. More spirits, some of them were colorful. Each color has meaning. These are not randomly purchased pieces of tissue paper and, oh, I think I'll cut this spirit on this one. These are the spirits that do belong in the woods. Multiple copies of 3 kinds of water spirits, spirit of fire, air spirit, earth spirit. This is getting very elemental, isn't it? 2 kinds of spirits of the sky, 2 kinds of spirits of the dead, 2 kinds of spirits of the night, the trail spirit, spirit of lost people, spirit of the forest, spirit of wind, and the overlord who does kind of rule it over. Yes?
Colored paper, was that what they started with, or did they call it white paper?
Or did they call it what?
White paper.
Blank paper?
Did they color the paper?
Oh, Juanito purchased white newsprint and colored tissue paper. Originally, and to some extent still today, the paper was made out of pounded bark. Beautiful light brown color. So those are all the spirits, and he named each one for me. There are others for other ceremonies, but that's what he stuck to for the ceremony that we're talking about today. I observed 4 healing ceremonies. So there he is, he's stacking his spirits. They all have to be stacked in just the right way to be hauled over to Vicente's house, which is where the costumbre is going to happen. So he spent days working on these cutouts. But getting toward the costumbre, it happened at night. Costumbre minus 1 hour. Let's see, I actually have a few notes here. What are they doing? Well, this is Vicente's house and his family. And that on the left, that hut sort of is where they store their corn. But they were using it to arrange flowers, flowers and flowers and flowers. In fact, see, the flowers were a very important part. They told me they picked 500 marigolds. They grow wild there in the woods, can you imagine? They fixed up 50 special bouquets, some strings of marigolds, almost like daisy chains, we would say, other kinds of flowers, various kinds of leaves, all necessary for the ceremony. At that point, they were also making a temporary altar outside, out front. And in back of the house, the women of the extended family were getting chickens and turkeys ready for the ceremony. Some people like to have their pictures taken more than others. Costumbre minus 1/2 hour. Things are getting down to the wire. So back at Juanito's place, the violin and guitar are down from the wall. Juanito has gotten his wife to help with arranging and stacking these paper spirits. Over at Vicente's, fires started in the kitchen. They're washing the pot, started the fire on the hearth. The griddle for tortillas is put on. Women are washing the things that they're going to be using. Last minute flower arranging. 3 men removed the front door of the house and took a big old chest out because these are well-attended ceremonies, some of them, so they were expecting a crowd, and they got it. So the ceremony took place from 8:35 p.m. to 8:45 a.m., according to my notes. That's about 12 hours. And it wasn't exactly nonstop ceremony, but it was long periods of prayers, offerings, and music. That's basically what it was, along with a lot of rearranging of things and conferring what's going to happen next, taking breaks. It is hard work for the people who were, for Juanito and the musicians especially. So they'd go out for a cigarette or whatever. And involved also, besides the offerings, were candles and incense, flowers, of which you've seen, bells. Juanito had a whistle, a clay whistle. And one thing to note, I didn't know where else to put this, things in Middle America, that's Central America and Southern Mexico, are done in multiples of 4. That's an ancient tradition. So in my notes, it's like, this was done 4 times, or 4 of these were set out. It's their sacred number. The offerings were given at 5 different places. Almost every house in Piedra Grande has an altar. It's maybe about this tall on 4 legs. Up on top here are pictures of Catholic saints, usually a cross. I think you can see that one there. Candles of various sorts, flowers. And then underneath the altar on the ground is another place where things happen, especially during a ceremony. Offerings were happening there. And in a way, you can think of the upper level of the altar as being kind of the Christian area, and underneath it's the more indigenous religion. They easily mix the two. So that's 2 of the places where offerings were made. That outside temporary altar. In the kitchen at the fire god traditionally was very important for the Otomi, still is. And at the musician's station, the violin and guitarist. And those musicians worked so hard during the night. They and Juanito are the ones who know what comes next, because you have to know what piece to play next, and I'll explain that in a second. But by the middle of the night, the violinist was pretty drunk, because one of the things that was in the offerings was beer and hard moonshine alcohol. And of course, they consumed their offerings. The guitarist, who was Juanito's son, by the way, was just sleeping whenever he could. He'd just go like this, and then the violinist would start playing, and kind of nudge the guitarist. And, oh yes, he'd start playing. So the first thing you need to do is just set things up, locate where the candles are going to be, spread out the spirits ready to receive their offerings, get some of those flowers out there. That takes a while. And the offerings themselves included chicken and turkey meat, eggs, both raw and cooked. What might look like tomato soup there is actually blood that was drained. They actually brought the turkey in, took scissors and cut its neck and drained its blood into this dish. Tortillas, of course. These buns, bread, were bought not in Piedra Grande. Nobody makes bread in Piedra Grande. Coffee, atole, which is a drink made from corn. And even the spirits evidently have their vices, because they were offered beer, soda pop. Again, colors have meaning, so they had different colors on hand for different purposes. Cigarettes, this is the moonshine rum. And when they can get it, they offer marijuana also. This time there was no marijuana. It's a little dicey in the countryside in Mexico obtaining marijuana, and they don't grow it. So the music is something that I was particularly interested in as an ethnomusicology student. The violin and guitar. Throughout the night, as things proceeded, there was a song for every action, for every offering. And it was repeated, 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 until that's all done, and then they move on to a new song. It requires tremendous knowledge and memory on the part of the musicians. So they are equal partners with Juanito, the actual healer who has connections, special connections to the spirit world. And you can sort of work your way up the ladder from guitarist to violinist. And Juanito, the healer, had been a violinist also. So that's kind of how you get your jobs in this business. And my professor, the one who took us to Mexico, had this notion about the music, and he published it in the Journal of Ethnomusicology, that the music has meaning as specific as words do. People who attend the ceremony can quote the texts of the pieces, translate it into actual spoken language. They know at any point what the music is saying. I put those in quotes because, of course, the music isn't talking, but it is sort of. And for instance, musical intervals have meanings. If you play a motif once and then put it up a third, it means it has added meaning. Rhythmic patterns and combinations of those is just, I didn't get so far as to analyze my music here, but I trust my professor. He had it all figured out. In this way, this is a scan of 2 pages of his publication. You can see what it's like. All those numbers are just different motifs in the music that he assigned. There are verbs and prepositional phrases and tenses, and you can see the actual meanings that were described to him by the people who had knowledge of this. So it's a complex system. Would you like to hear a little bit of that music? Yes. You'll hear the violinist kind of noodling a little bit, and then the guitarist wakes up and starts playing. You can hear Juanito offering prayers. What's happening, you'll hear me say, I think 9:50 or something, so it's relatively early in the ceremony, still spreading out things, setting things out, figuring out where everything goes. So that's what the music is saying. And that's Juanito talking in Otomi, which I did not understand. So that's enough to give you an idea of what it sounds like. And then there are somewhat different tunes, but it's throughout the night, but it's all sort of along those lines. Yes?
Do they ever put words to the music that they're singing?
There was a little bit of singing at one point, but the meaning in the music itself is enough to get across the meaning. Yes?
Did they make any of those instruments?
Not in Piedra Grande, but in the general area. Or I think the guitar was a factory-made guitar, but the violins are usually what you might call homemade. They're far from Stradivarius's. And the music itself isn't exactly what we'd call easy listening music, but it is so important to them. And throughout the night, all this stuff is being added to the stacks of paper spirits. Once things were wrapped up, and done with, and all the offerings were given, they took and just rolled the whole mass of offerings and spirits up, put it in a bag, and this is the guys in hats are two of Vicente's brothers, and they take off for the woods and find a good place, set it down, unroll the whole thing, and the spirits are finally reestablished in their own homes, and they're not in town bothering Vicente's family. And they're off. And I walked the 3 or 4 miles to Ixhuatlan and spent 2 nights there and a day sleeping and copying over my scribbled notes so that I and others would be able to understand them in the future. And I know that many of you have spent time in other places, sometimes extended amounts of time. And I bet you've had the same experience that I've had looking back with some distance. For me, it's on Piedra Grande. And it's a life-changing experience, isn't it, to go and participate in someone else's way of life. And this was so different from my own 22-year-old experience. It kind of wrenched me out of my own way of thinking. And in a case like that, and I bet you've had the same experience, I think of those people, whenever there's news in the world, I think that could have been them. During COVID, I thought, I wonder how they made out. I have no idea. But I think it's good for each of us to have an experience like this. And well, it made my anthropology work. I never went into the business of anthropology, but I think I practice anthropology every day. Thank you very much. If you want to listen to more music, I'll turn it on, or if you have questions. Yes?
Is this an area where immigrants from Nicaragua come to?
Where immigrants are what, coming through?
From other parts of Central America like Nicaragua?
No. This is a very isolated place. I can't imagine that the immigrant trail goes through there. When I was there, I could count on one hand the times when there were outsiders coming through. Once was in the middle of the night. I heard a horse galloping through. Nobody knew what it was.
All by itself.
Well, I assume it had a rider on it. I was just woken up from sleep, so it was dark. I don't know.
What were you there for originally? I mean, besides the Sorcerer's Apprentice, were you there to teach or what?
I was there to collect information as an anthropology graduate student or ethnomusicology graduate student. So I was always taking notes, taking pictures, asking questions, writing down the answers, making friends. Anthropologists like to say that they are participant observers. So just joining in life as much as I could and always observing. Yes, Dean.
Did they speak some Spanish too, or how did you communicate with?
Very, very few women in town spoke Spanish, and most of the men spoke a little bit of Spanish. So it was difficult to communicate through language with them. I sort of made a game of it and tried to learn as much Otomi as I could, knowing that I'd forget it the minute I left, which is what happened. So, yeah, I'm sure that these days more people there speak Spanish. I've tried to look up a few statistics, and things have changed a bit there. But I think that I would bet that everyone there still speaks Otomi. More people might speak Spanish. I saw that 0.02 of the people over a certain age had finished high school. So they went somewhere else to go to high school. And what amazes me is that they came back. They might be a minority for all I know. 10% went to high school and they're still in larger town Mexico or city Mexico. Yes.
To me, the music you played sounded similar in some ways to music I heard in Puerto Rico.
Oh,
Spanish type music.
okay. Yeah, it's influenced heavily by colonial Spanish music. Yeah, it's not. Maybe the tuning of their scale tends toward the indigenous. It sounds really out of tune to us, kind of set my teeth on edge. But I'll give them the benefit of doubt on that. And my professor who studied the music measured it in cents, they call it, CENTS, and showed what their scale is, and it's not quite like ours. Yeah.
Did they accept you being there as a white person, a lot different from them?
Did they expect me being there as a person? Accept? Sure, in general. People were extremely welcoming. And I have to say, who among us would sight unseen take in a foreign person into their house, feed them, do what they can for them, and let them wander around asking Snoopy questions? Really, I have been so welcomed in Mexico in general. Yeah, but again, they really couldn't figure out really why I was there. Now, yes,
Is there a governing body that governs this group?
that governs this what?
This group you were telling me?
This place. There is this will be the last question. I understand some of you have to get off. There is what they call it, a municipal agent who's a local appointed to be the liaison with that man in Ixhuatlan who we checked in with, who's the head of the, you might say, county. So his job is to, well, I could go on. Or organize village projects, that kind of thing. Okay.
Let's thank Eileen.
Thank you.